Welcome back to The Empire Never Ended. We're continuing here. Not Bob Ross, it's another Bob. It's
Bobby?
Yeah, so Bob Matthews here. Bobby, damn it. He's continuing his tragic personal journey into ultraviolence and ultimately his death today. Is that about right, Boris? Yeah.
Yes.
So last time we talked about the Order. We talked about Bob's kind of early childhood as a young Bircher, a very young Bircher, like an 11-year-old Birch
11,
nerd.
yeah.
Yeah, before starting a teenage militia.
That's like Communist Party style of recruiting children.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and then what? Where do we leave him then? They killed one of their own in this ridiculous sledgehammer attack after they formed like a proper outfit, doing some robberies, knocking over porn stores, threatening to blow up porn theaters, just lots of porn related activity. And
well, I mean, they had also knocked off a couple armored trucks already, several banks.
Yep.
So
getting serious.
They're
getting real.
They got some money in the bank.
Unsuccessful in identifying black criminals.
Yes.
That's also something that happened in the last time. Yes, that's true. Yeah. And now I guess where we're picking up, they're making money hand over fist, right?
No, they're doing all right now.
Running the counterfeit operation.
Yeah, and they're still doing the counterfeiting.
So what is the year right now? Like, where are we?
Now is 1984.
All right.
And it is, yeah. And this story ends in 1984.
So everything's gonna be packed in here, huh?
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, like, when I think about like this half of the episode where there's going to be a lot of action, I actually find that to be a lot less interesting in some ways. You know what I mean? Because like you go through like all the events that happen, and it's like, okay, there's like intense paranoia. This group goes to that, blah 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 blah, and it's it's kind of a lot to follow. So I'll try to like summarize the main points, and really what we're here for is kind of the impact and ideology of these guys, and how this formed.
But you're not going to skimp on the paranoia, are you? I mean,
no, I'm not going to skimp.
I'm here for that,
No. Yeah.
All
right. So, right, where we left off, as Fritz said, they had already committed their first murder, which was, their other Nazi pal, Walter West, brutally murdered him, and now decided that they're going to prepare to level up to level 5, which is assassination.
The guy, the Nazi friend that they murdered, was the one that they wanted to murder with a sledgehammer.
Yes.
And then tried it, didn't work, and then shot him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, lovely guys. And they began to assemble this kill list. Now, this kill list is kind of interesting. And, Alan Berg is kind of the least important person on the list. So the list ranges from Henry Kissinger.
Oh, no way.
Which, like, all right. To, like, a Southern Poverty Law Center director at the time who was, very prominent and active. But also, like, they wanted to kill a Rothschild, kill a Rockefeller, that kind of, like, symbolic, high-profile attacks. They pretty much figured out, I think, that would be a little bit more complicated than, than doing something closer to home. So they settled on Alan Berg. Now, Alan Berg is, as we know, Nazis like having kind of petty disputes with people and settling those petty disputes. And Alan Berg was definitely somebody who was on their radar because, some of them had directly interacted with him before.
Okay.
So just real briefly, who is Alan Berg? Alan Berg was a shock jock radio host from based in Denver, Colorado. He was born in Chicago, Jewish guy from Chicago. He had a career he was an attorney. He had a number of other jobs, and I guess was a horrible alcoholic. It kind of ruined his career, and he went out with his wife, who was originally from Denver, to Colorado to, go to rehab and dry out and all that stuff. And he did. And divorced that wife and did whatever, but ended up finding his way onto the radio and finding that he was pretty good at it. So he had a couple different shows, but he really came to prominence on the network KOA in Denver. And this is kind of the high point of shock jock radio in the US, I think, like the 80s and 90s. This was like a big thing. And, people that remember or know about like what radio was like at the time, there was a lot of call-ins, right? And the whole point was, people call in and then some guy, the host yells at you, tells you you're an idiot. They get into debates about stuff. You had the right-wing guys and the Christian radio that would do that. And then you had some more kind of liberal shock jocks in bigger cities that would like also do the same thing. And Alan Berg was one of these guys. And he was, he liked particularly engaging themes of anti-Semitism, typical shock jock style. So he'd like yell at people, cut them off the line when, and be like, you're an idiot.
I kind of think if I went to heaven, it'd be boring.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I hate to tell you.
Heaven is the most beautiful.
What is heaven like? What is heaven like?
Do you know that the gates of heaven
Are there really gates? I mean, like real honest to God gates?
Yes.
What are they made of?
Of pearl.
So he was known to get into these arguments with racists.
Okay.
And that was like a thing he really enjoyed doing. So obviously all these racists in that area knew about him, and many of them called into the show, including David Lane.
All right.
So David Lane is connected to Alan Berg in several ways. One, he listened to the show and called in a few times. He got into an argument with him, with Alan Berg about like integrated housing. David Lane had a failed career in real estate because he didn't want to sell houses to black people.
Great.
it's
Great.
Typical Nazi shit.
Yeah.
So, he definitely had like a beef with Alan Berg to begin with. Yeah. So, as we mentioned, David Lane had a failed career in real estate. And so he did what many other Nazis do. And, at the time he was already organizing with Aryan nations. He had been the head of the Colorado Klan, budding Nazi. So he worked as a security guard for a newspaper called the Primrose and Cattleman's Gazette, which was owned by a fellow named Roderick Elliott. Now, Roderick Elliott did a kind of stupid thing for a business owner of some sort of, media, in that he went on Alan Berg's show and said a lot of really anti-Semitic shit. He went on and on about how there was a Jewish plot to destroy the American farmer, to which Berg responded, that doesn't seem like a good investment. Like, why would Jews be buying out these farms? Like, if they're all failing anyway,
Yeah. And
he told him to fuck off. Now, Roderick Elliott subsequently published the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion in his newspaper. Now, Bob Matthews was in fact a big fan of Elliott's paper. In that National Alliance speech of his, he praised that as a great example of non-Jew controlled media, that they were doing a great thing representing the hardworking white American farmer. But of course, this wasn't a tiny newspaper. Like, it had pretty wide distribution in the area, and it had lots of corporate sponsors. These corporate sponsors withdrew their funding after he published the protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Sure.
Not surprisingly. The Marine Corps, which had also been, I guess, had it distributed on their bases, withdrew from, distributing it as well. And the paper went under. So as a result, David Lane lost his job. And that to him was, of course, a clear indication of Jewish control of media, right?
So he lost 2 income sources because he was racist or was hanging out with racists.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Typical thing, like,
It's
the
probably
Jews control the
Jews'
media
fault.
because, this newspaper fucking published the protocols of Elders of Zion.
Yeah.
There we go.
Mhm.
So, yeah, David Lane had a pretty big beef, obviously, there, and he was very enthusiastic about killing him. Now, I'm going to real quick introduce another character to this story because he's very important for kind of both of the next events and actually to come. So it was kind of around this time when they were planning to kill Berg that this guy by the name of Richard Scootari joined the gang.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Scootari's kind of typical in his Nazi development for people at the time. He was an East Coast guy, spent a bunch of time in the military, had served in various different bases, NATO bases in Europe and Turkey, I believe. Came back to the U.S., kind of feeling like, communists were taking over and that, they weren't doing enough, blah, 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 became a member of the John Birch Society, and would later join the militia movement. So this typical Bircher to militia to Nazi pipeline that we've seen in this story over and over again. And he even, for example, had met Depew, attended Depew's lectures, kind of was very into that Depewian model. But when he found out about the white territorial imperative or whatever in the Pacific Northwest, he decided to go out there and join these serious Nazis. And he was a little bit more serious than Matthews in some ways. He was a lot more paranoid. I think he had a better idea of how security structures work. He had worked also doing kind of private security and doing all kinds of stuff. And so he was kind of shocked when he went out there that it was so easy to join these guys who were officially very clandestine and doing major criminal acts, and that they kind of readily accepted him and just told him that they had this plot to kill this Jewish guy. He was a little bit surprised by that, and he would later really emphasize security culture a lot, and it was very important in the further development.
Okay.
So now we know he's there.
Okay.
Okay. So now to the murder. Now, we mentioned before that Matthews had a new mistress, his new lover, Zilla Craig. And we briefly mentioned Zilla's mother, Jean Craig, who was also, part of this racist Christian community and really loved Bob Matthews, thought he was a great guy, and was willing to do pretty much anything to help them. So Robbie actually enlisted her to scope out Berg's movements. So she went down to Denver and spent some time tracking Alan Berg, seeing where he went to lunch, the routes he would take from home to work, various other things he did, and successfully actually traced, got his day-to-day routine. And of course, Robbie was very impressed with this and thought it was sufficient to go into action. So they went down there. Robbie Matthews and this kill squad went down to Denver and also traced his movements. Went to see if her information was correct, and it was. And then they decided it was time. They could, kill him. They knew what he was doing, what he was up to. He had a pretty typical routine. So on June 18th, 1984, they followed Berg back to his house after he had purchased groceries after work. As he was getting out of his car, Bruce Pierce, who was the trigger man in this operation, came out of the car and shot him dead with a fully automatic silenced MAC-10.
Oof, okay.
Now, all the shots hit, the gun jammed on the 13th bullet, but, that was already overkill. He had been shot 12 times and was, dead pretty much, it's full auto. There's not much you can do.
Mm-hmm.
They peeled off, dipped out of Denver, and went back home. Gave it no thought. Now, this gun will be important later on, so don't forget about it.
Kind of hard to forget it.
Well, they actually had no shortage of access to full auto weapons. They had like Uzis, AR-15s. It was easier to buy full auto back in the day too, and it was very easy. They also had like buddies who were into gunsmithing and from like the militia community and stuff like that. It wasn't hard for them to modify weapons to make them full auto. So obviously this murder of Alan Berg, who was prominent figure in Denver, controversial figure, but very prominent in Denver, brought a lot of attention to the crew, or no, not necessarily to the crew, but the FBI had an idea that it was probably a racially motivated murder, right? That this guy had a history with confronting racists on the radio, and so it was reasonable to assume that the guys who killed him were probably some variety of like white supremacist, Nazi, racist, whatever. Berg was buried back in Chicago, and that's the last we'll hear about Berg for a while in this.
Do you know if they had some sort of expectations about this? Like what they, was it just like a personal grudge? They thought it was like a good target, or do they expect like, okay, we're going to do this and then people are going to come out of the woodwork and the revolution will kick off? Or
yeah, so they didn't necessarily think it would kick off the revolution. Not in the same way that killing like a way more prominent figure would, but they definitely did think that it would let other like-minded people know that somebody was doing actions and taking matters into their own hand. So not necessarily like a spark to trigger the revolution, but like a message to other Nazis around, hey, look, someone's getting things done. Now, David Lane, being the fucking sicko that he is, bragged about the killing to other members that didn't take part in the kill group. He was very happy to say that they, killed this filthy Jew and all this other stuff. Said like really horrible shit about it. Like you should have seen him fall and, blah, blah, blah. He was very pleased with himself. Sure. And again, this is one of these moments where Scootari was like, man, these guys are not very careful. Right. Yeah. But, they were feeling pretty giddy and elated from this killing. And they immediately, these are the heroes of the American neo-Nazi movement.
Sounds like it.
This is, something that they really love. And, these guys were really great. Bob Matthews was really like a hard working family man who went astray.
Of course.
They killed their buddy with a fucking sledgehammer and murdered like a guy just because he was Jewish. He also bragged about it to Zilla in some ways too. Like, oh, we did it. We really did it. And blah, blah, blah. But they immediately
I want the hammer to fall on these people so bad.
It's going to be a little bit. So, they immediately got to work to planning their biggest heist yet. So, they figured, okay, we did this killing. People know that we're serious. Now we need a shit ton more money. So Rob Matthews actually had a contact in the Brinks armored, the Brinks armored truck company, who's this guy by the name of Charles Ostrout, who's his inside man. He had met him way before, I think at an Aryan Nations convention in Idaho. He was a guy who, was a racist loser from the Bay Area who claimed that he couldn't advance at his job because of affirmative action. And like Asians were taking over the Bay Area and this kind of thing. So, he was obviously a sympathetic voice in there. And Matthews immediately, he contacted him and he was like, look, we need to do something serious. Like, we need your help, basically. Like the last couple armored truck heists went okay, but still like, $250,000 is okay, but it's not enough. Like if we're going to kick off this white revolution, we need a lot more money. Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, Ostrat was a little hesitant at first because obviously like, he could get into serious trouble. But he eventually came around and gave them a very good tip-off. So he told them that there is a route that one of the trucks takes in Northern California that carries a lot of money, and that at a certain point near the town of Ukiah or Ukiah, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It has to slow down. The truck has to, shift down into first gear basically to get up this really big hill. And that would be, and it's in an isolated rural area. It's a pretty good place to hit the truck.
Uh-huh.
And so they got to work scoping that out. So they sent guys out to California and they followed one of the trucks on one of the routes once and saw that, in fact, it does go incredibly slowly at this point, and it would be a perfect place to pull off this heist. And so they decide to go for it. But, Scootari, again, insisting on security culture of some kind, was like, look, guys, like, this is going to be a big operation. We all need code names. We can't talk too much on the phone about this, blah, blah, blah. And so, they all got stupid little code names. Of course, we know that Robert Matthews was Carlos because of the time that he went in brownface to rob the porn store. And
maybe also because of the leftist, terrorist Carlos, the Jackal.
No, they just are racist.
Okay.
And they're like, oh, he was in brownface and had a mustache. That's what Mexicans are, whatever.
Sure.
Gary Yarborough was Yosemite Sam. Denver Parmenter was called Sandals. Jim Dye, who was that Vietnam vet that was the trigger man in the West Killing, was Mr. May. Soderquist became Cripple. And then, a bunch of other stupid names Mr. Black was Richard Scootari. Bingham was Bruce Pierce, blah, blah, blah. Marbles was Ken Loff because apparently he had his Long Island accent made him sound like he had marbles in his mouth or whatever.
Okay.
And I'm telling you these names now because later on, that's pretty much what they would exclusively go by when they went more seriously underground.
Okay.
Just keep that in mind. So, when they decide to pull off the action, they go in 2 pickup trucks, and one is ahead, or they're both following the Brinks truck. When they get to the hill, and the truck starts going uphill, one of the trucks, driven by Yarborough, speeds up and passes the Brinks truck and cuts him off. Now, the other truck immediately then stops behind it, and they have the guy boxed in. To let them know that they're serious, they hold up a sign like they did in one of the previous heists, which said, get out or you're dead. And to let them know that they mean business, they came out armed. Matthews actually made a fake bazooka because he wanted them to think that he could literally blow away the truck.
Yeah.
But apparently that wasn't really necessary because one of the guys had a high-powered, he had a .308 rifle and fired a couple shots into the windshield, above the guys' heads, which punctured the glass, which was, whatever, it's armored glass or whatever, but,
right.
That range it will penetrate. And so they knew that then you meant business. And now, okay, so in a lot of accounts of this heist, they really like to portray them as being super well organized, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they had a guy with a stopwatch who was yelling out times, right? Because they figured they had to do this really quickly.
Uh-huh.
And this is a sign of how well organized they were and how serious they were. But apparently,
should we get a stopwatch?
Yarborough, when he got out of the truck that was in front, didn't put on the parking brake. It was in neutral, started to roll, and they had to get back in. And they started taking out these bags of money. But it wasn't. It was still the middle of the day, and even though it was a pretty remote place, other cars started to show up on the highway. Sure. People were getting out, what's going on. Matthews and crew had to go. They fired some shots in the air and, basically telling people to back off. And they took as much money as they could. And this was a lot, quite a lot. They'd later figure out exactly how much, but it was a lot. I think there was still some money left in the truck, but they figured they had to haul ass if they were going to get out of there. Of course, this is a time before cell phones, but they all had CB radios, and they noticed that one of the motorists that was stuck on the highway was radioing that there was, a robbery taking place on the highway. Okay. So they figured it was time to get the fuck out of there. Now, in this process, Bobby Matthews, being the genius that he is, and being, a well-disciplined militiaman, dropped his pistol in the Brinks truck.
Oops.
He didn't know this at the time, but this would be a major undoing for them.
Uh-huh.
So they pack up in their trucks and they dip out. They had set up a drop-off point where they were going to leave the trucks, get in a different car, and they had planned rather smartly, and since they're survivalists, they like camping, they decided not to really try to flee too far out of the area because they knew that the cops were obviously going to shut down, make a perimeter, and like shut a lot of stuff down. So like they couldn't really go to any major population center probably without getting noticed. And so they had picked in advance like a really remote place in the woods that was like near a garbage dump, like a landfill or something, where they would go and camp out for a couple days until things died down and they could get out of there. And that worked for them. They got to their spot, they camped out, they had a good time laughing and recalling their wonderful adventure when Bob Matthews realized that he no longer had the handgun that he brought with him, and that he recalled that somebody had actually purchased that handgun legally.
Oh.
So not a good look.
Yeah.
Not a good look at all.
Mr. Black must have been pissed.
Yeah, they were all kind of pissed, but they were like, okay, whatever,
Damn it, Bobby.
So after things died down a little bit, they each took some money and put like $10,000 in their socks. This is apparently a thing that they did.
How big
just
were
to have
these
on
socks?
them. Yeah, I know, right? $10,000 is, I'd imagine it's probably in hundreds or 50s, but
Yeah, even
it's still
so, that's a lot.
Major wad
Yeah.
of cash. Yeah.
Could you hear them just crunching around as they try to act casual in the supermarket?
So they make their way back up towards the Pacific Northwest at a friend's place where they could really like hunker down, count the money, and figure out what they're dealing with here. And they went to the house and spent pretty much all night counting this money and realized that they had jacked $3.6 million.
Damn.
That's a lot. That's a lot
good
of
haul.
money, and it's a good haul. In 1984, this was the largest heist in U.S. history.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of fucking money. A lot of fucking money. So then the question was, okay, I think they were probably pretty surprised at how much they actually got. And there were a few different ideas of what to do with this. Now, they had made a list before of certain groups that were definitely going to get money. And they had to figure out how much people were going to take for themselves. This is a whole complicated thing. I won't go into it too much. It's only kind of important later. What's important is the kind of list of people that they decided are definitely going to get money. So take a wild guess who is maybe first.
National Alliance?
Exactly.
All
William
right.
Pierce, National Alliance. But also on the list was, of course, Aryan Nations. The Carolina Knights of the KKK, led by Fraser Glenn Miller. Louis Beam, who's a Texas Klan leader. Tom Metzger of White Aryan Resistance in California. Bob Miles and his Mountain Kirk.
It's a new one to me.
Yeah, there were actually a few others too that I hadn't really heard of as well. But this was kind of like the short list. Of people
some
that
of them were members of a Christian identity group that wasn't Aryan Nation. Some other with a very long name, something like the Sword, the Covenant,
the Covenant of the Sword and Shield, or something like that.
very long.
Yeah. They go out and visit them. So they end up going back home. They've kind of figured out who is taking which money to whom. For Robert Matthews, this becomes his great bonding road trip with Zilla Craig. And they embark on a good old-fashioned American road trip across country to distribute their money to various different racist and Nazi groups.
Man, it's like a Robin Clan Hood kind of story.
Yes. So they go to that Covenant of the Sword and whatever the fuck it is, which is kind of on their way to the East Coast, because obviously going to William Luther Pierce is like one of the main priorities. But, they go, they stop off, they give money. People are very happy about this. Obviously, they're getting lots and lots of money out of nowhere. Although I would find out later that some Nazi groups that didn't know of them so well were sketched out by it and thought that they were feds.
Okay.
And
So
a couple of
these
them, like,
Nazi
even
groups had
refused
way
money.
better OPSEC than the Order did.
Yeah, yeah.
That group is actually called the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord.
And the arm of the, yeah,
Aha.
it's Jesus Christ.
It's a weird list of stuff.
Yeah, one of these other groups was something that was similar to Christian identity, but wasn't really Christian identity too. And it wasn't this group. They were just some other racist Christian group, but they didn't follow like the kind of British Israeli model that, Christian identity.
There was something
took on.
called the Laporte Church of Christ. One of them was a member of that, I think. No,
Yeah.
two of them. I don't know. I have no idea what this is.
Some other racist Christians.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't say. I'm looking at their like Wikipedia page, and it doesn't say they're like Christian identity, but basically they are. I mean, they think that the Europeans are through Israel and the Jews are the synagogue of Satan and so on.
Yeah, that's pretty CI.
But I guess they don't consider themselves officially part of that
Maybe,
Christian identity movement.
Yeah, they rejected the label. I don't know why, but okay.
Yeah. So again, on their way to William Luther Pierce and the National Alliance compound, they stop off in Philadelphia to hang out with their old buddy Tom Martinez.
Get a cheesesteak, see Tom.
Zilla was apparently horrified by Philadelphia. She had was a country gal herself, had never been to Philly, never been to kind of that major East Coast American city.
Whoa,
They were really shocked and horrified.
Quite a place to start. I have to say.
Yeah, indeed. So who is Tom Martinez? I mentioned him, I think, in the previous episode briefly, and said that we would get back to him, and this is where we're going to get back to him. Now, Tom Martinez is a guy who is kind of always on the sidelines of this story, except that for some reason, Bob Matthews really, really liked him and trusted him way too much.
All right.
Because Bob Martinez, probably more than anyone, would lead to the whole group falling apart. Now, he met Tom Martinez at that National Alliance gathering that he gave a speech at. Martinez was just some guy from Philly who was of Spanish ancestry, but, his last name made everybody think that he was a Latin American.
The wrong kind of Spanish.
Yeah, American racists are very stupid, especially at this time, with not understanding racial hierarchies in Latin America too. That you can be Mexican and be white, and I've seen funny comments on the internet on skinhead videos where somebody will be like, "Yeah, 88 from Argentina," and they'll be like, "Shut up, spick" or something. And it's
wow. Well, that's also probably the remnant of the old idea, that white people are Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So.
Yeah. But, he did have some trouble in his life because of his heritage, I guess, even though it was Castilian, straight up Spanish. And but apparently he would like to pronounce his name as Martinez instead of Martinez to sound less Spanish.
It doesn't sound like anything.
Yeah.
Martinez.
Yeah. Now, Tom Martinez was involved with the National Alliance for quite some time. In Philly, he was in charge of selling their newspapers and apparently did a pretty good job doing that. He got a little bit blackpilled on the movement when he got fined for saying racial slurs at a bar, and when he reached out to National Alliance, they didn't want to help him out with his legal fees. And he was
they do not back people up at all.
No.
Yeah.
And he was pretty pissed because he was basically like, I made you guys so much money hustling these fucking newspapers in Philly, and now I can't even get a couple $100 for my legal fees.
Mm-hmm.
And that's by most accounts where he starts to kind of get a little bit more disillusioned with the movement and stops caring as much. But nevertheless, he's very significant to the West Coast crew because he is their main point in the East Coast. Their guy in Philly, and at various different times they use him to help with the counterfeiting operation in the East Coast. So even David Lane and some crew went to Martinez earlier, bringing like tens of thousands of dollars in counterfeit bills, telling him to pass it out around the area, so that like, it wouldn't all be concentrated on the West Coast. But Martinez was apparently not too bright. Like, oh, and just one funny thing. I guess when David Lane and some of the other order guys went out there to give him the money, a bunch of them just sat there watching A Birth of a Nation over and over again on like VHS.
I don't know any other way to celebrate.
Yeah.
We're going to watch it 4 times.
Yeah.
God, over and over again. That movie's like 4 hours long. Remember? It's fucking long as fuck.
And it's a fucking silent film.
And it's horrible.
Yeah. So Martinez was involved in their counterfeiting operation. And like I said, Lane and others instructed him to not shit where he eats. Like, don't pass out these bills in your neighborhood. They told him, like, go to Jersey, go to New York, do it there, do it somewhere where you can't get traced back to you. But he did exactly the opposite and passed a lot of fake bills all around his neighborhood and got detected when he was buying a lottery ticket, like on the corner store, like around the street from his house, like where people recognize him.
That is definitely pushing your luck. I mean, this guy. And
not only did he do it once, he did it twice at the same shop. And like the first time he did it, the shop owner was like, this is like a counterfeit bill, but like, maybe it was an accident. Then he comes in the next day, does the exact same thing. And the guy calls the cops. And this is what leads to Martinez actually eventually going down, right? So Martinez gets arrested. They find that he's been like passing counterfeit bills, and they kind of put pressure on him. And that's where he starts cooperating with the feds.
Okay.
Now Matthews and nobody else in the order knows this. So like Matthews is like hanging out there, they're having a good time or whatever. And at this point, Martinez isn't like yet a super big snitch. He definitely becomes one. Like as time goes on, as the FBI starts to figure out more about who's behind all this counterfeiting. Now, how do they start to find out about that? Well, let's go back to that handgun that Matthews so cleverly dropped in the Brinks armored truck. So, the cops and the FBI find this gun. They conclude that it doesn't belong to obviously any of the guards. And they see that it has a serial number. And, they look up the serial number, find out that it was sold at a gun shop in Montana. And they go to Montana, they get the records of the guy who purchased it, a copy of his driver's license, blah, blah, blah. And that takes them to Zilla Craig's house, or a trailer.
This is so idiotic. Like,
so idiotic. I mean, for like this like super serious Nazi hit squad, like that's a major fuck up. Like,
yes.
Like, first of all, it's a major fuck up. These guys are complete gun nuts, right? Like, they have tons of full auto weapons, totally illegal. They have motherfuckers that like make guns, militia, crazy gun nuts. It's like not hard for them to have unregistered like firearms. And this guy takes a fucking registered firearm that like can be traced back to his fucking mistress. On the biggest heist in U.S. history.
Yes.
Okay, sure, it's an accident. It could happen to anyone. But, so much for, like, the decades of training that he's had since, like, the Sons of Liberty when he was, like, 19 years old to today. Like, he really seemed to learn a lot in those, like, decades of training and organizing and planning and being clandestine and all that kind of shit.
He's truly a
major fuck up. Because the FBI then started to look at Zilla Craig, and they started looking at her phone lines. And they noticed, because, Matthew spent a lot of time there, especially when he was going to and from various actions. So, like we mentioned, he met her when they were getting the counterfeiting, printing presses and stuff from Colorado, and they stopped off there. He would go there all the time because basically he had left his wife at this point. Like, not officially, they never divorced, and she like stood by her man because she was like a fucking trad wife Nazi. But at this point, he was using pretty much any excuse that he could have to go out to Montana to be with Zilla. We know, of course, that that family was instrumental in the planning of the murder of Alan Berg. So, there were a lot of different phone calls coming in and out of this trailer. So the FBI started to make connections, right? And eventually they had a list of names of pretty much half of like the order.
Oh, great.
and Robert Matthews and all these fucking idiots who had fucked up this epically. So that gun was essentially the key to their investigation. Like, without that, it probably would have taken them much, much, much longer to figure out what the fuck was going on with this heist, right? Because other than that, like, you know, they had made their escape. They made it out with all that money. They'd already started to distribute it. And if it wasn't for that fucking gun, you know, they probably could have kept going for years. Now, there are some other problems. We've talked about how they were alerted to the counterfeiting and that they were starting to investigate various different people that are associated with that crew. But this really allowed them to make the connections between everybody. So, I mean, they realized that this was a fuck up. They didn't realize how bad of a fuck up it was, but they concluded that, like, there's absolutely no way that the FBI isn't going to start looking into this really, really seriously. Who knows what kind of information they can get from that gun, blah, blah, blah. You know, we should start actually trying to do something more underground.
Yeah, okay. Let's start now.
But again, like, while they say that, they also don't really do that. Because on the one hand, because they have such grandiose plans, right? Like, their plans aren't exactly realistic, and they have more money than they know what to do with. And so, you know, people start having various different ideas of, like, what they should do. So they decide that they should basically break up into smaller groups, right? Matthews will still be at the head, but, like, they should go different places and start kind of their own smaller operational groups, and, like, only get, you know, they have to get approval from Matthews, but basically they have more freedom to do what they want. And one of their major projects, again, not in really the spirit of clandestinity, was starting this Aryan Academy. Now, the Aryan Academy was supposed to be like a training camp for new Nazi recruits coming up to the Pacific Northwest. So they used a portion of this money to buy property, again, in the area where Matthews lived, or, you know, where his home was in that part of Washington. And his buddy Ken, the quote-unquote good guy, was kind of in charge of running, like, some of the day-to-day operations there. Keep in mind, Ken's the only guy that's, like, there, like, looking after his, like, wife and family and mother, you know, who's still alive at this point. Poor Peggy Hill. Yeah. You know, has a tremendous fuck up of a son. And, you know, so you'd expect, like, okay, they are, like, trying to do, like, really covert shit, but at the same time, they're using some of the money to fund this massive operation that has, like, more or less a public face, right? Like, anybody who, like, answers these ads or whatever to go move to the Northwest to be around fellow Aryans is going to go into this camp. And this camp is, like, you know, they were very well equipped. They, you know, put barbed wire up at the fence. They were buying new guns and, like, you know, uniforms, all this kind of shit for them to train with. So
upgrades.
Yeah, upgrades. And, you know, you'd think maybe somebody would start asking questions.
Sure.
But, you know. Now, I did mention that they had split up some of the money. Now, there's a very complicated story that involves Bruce Pierce and some of the other guys.
We should remind people who Bruce is.
Yeah, Bruce Pierce, no relation to William Luther Pierce.
No relation.
One of the founding members of the order, and, like, one of the kind of key men in some of their bigger operations. He was the trigger man in the Allen Berg murder. He was caught with some of the counterfeit money. So it's kind of a problematic figure for them in some ways too, even though he was, like, very dedicated. He had like trouble with the law and kind of attracted a lot of attention.
Sure.
Member of Aryan Nations.
Member of Aryan Nations, yeah.
He does a lot of fuck-ups, but at least he does something, you know?
Yes. I mean, that's literally the way they look at it.
Yes. Well, at least he's fucking up, you know?
I find it funny that one of the members of the order was called Frank Silva, which is the name of the actor who played Bob on Twin Peaks.
Oh, really?
All right.
I had a racial theory about Scootari. So apparently, like, it's you know, they call him Mr. Black, and they call him Mr. Black because he was, like, Italian and had, like, a dark complexion.
Sure.
But Scootari is, like, the Italian name, the Latin name for Skadar in Albania.
Oh, no way.
So maybe he was like one of those like Albanian Italians, like
Yeah.
Gramsci or whatever, like that Arbarash community or whatever. But it's possible. I mean, it's like an odd coincidence there. I guess like at some point, like when shit started getting like a little bit weird, like some of the order guys were like, "Well, is this guy even white?" And then
Yeah.
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 I mean, we
the
call him
perennial-
black. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah. It's the
We
perennial
jokingly
question
call him
on
Mr.
the fucking forums, are Albanians white or not? So
Yeah,
is
or
there-
Italians at this point.
Or
like, we've talked-
Italians, yes.
I mean, for Americans, yeah, it's whether Italians or I think most of them wouldn't have an opinion about Albanians probably.
Ooh, don't know. Depends on which neighborhood you live in, I guess. Best Italian food in Texas.
Where?
Albanian restaurants.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Albanians run good pizza shops in the U.S.
Fuck yeah.
too. It's a major business there in that community. So, with some of the pressure on them, there did start to emerge some kind of factionalism and rivalries, especially between Pierce and Matthews, because Pierce, I guess, was withholding some of the money from some of the other guys because he was like, I know how to use this better or whatever. And Matthews had to go sort that out, and they eventually, concluded that, okay, we're all friends here. We're in it for the same thing. We have to be a well-organized white group and
I guess.
do our thing. But of course, the heat was on. So with Matthews kind of easing some of the tension that was emerging in the group, he was still firmly in control. And this is actually when the group gets its real name. During this period. So previous to this, even at the beginning, at the initiation, they had referred to themselves as the organization, which is also a Turner Diaries reference, and sometimes as the order, which is what the inner circle.
It was the secret
in
to
the Turner
inner
Diaries.
circle. Yeah, behind the organization, and of course they had the book. You see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But Matthews thought it was high time to put a name to this goddamn thing, if they're going to be like a serious.
So he called it the name.
Well, no, this is where the Silent Brotherhood name comes from, which, Robert Matthews had wanted it to be in German. So this is where the Bruderschweigen comes from. And that name, I guess the German name comes from a book he had seen about like an SS division that was named something like that. Like it's a longer German phrase that came from some German, like Prussian soldier poet back in the day.
Sure.
So he thought this was like an appropriate name for the group. And, what's a good group without some nice symbols?
Hell yeah.
So, Zilla's mom, Jean, who we've mentioned now a few times, she took it upon herself to like design the logo and have medallions made up for them.
She's their Betsy Ross.
Yeah. So she went to like some jeweler in whatever the fuck town they were in and commissioned like a series of these medallions that had, the name Bruderschweigen on it, along with like, an axe and some shield, and then a phrase. It's really like the perfect mishmash of North American, like white people's idea of like what's European. So like the name is German. There was a phrase in Gaelic, and then some like Saxon word or some shit like that.
Huh.
So
right.
Irish are white, or maybe Scottish. Matthews was of Scottish ancestry and quite proud. I guess at some point he had tried to learn the bagpipe as well.
But
I guess it's like
awesome.
he wasn't cut out for it.
Yeah.
So, at this point, he also informs them that they have a name and that this is, what they're going to go by now. And, that's all fun and good. They get the test commission of the medallions delivered, and he's very pleased with that. He hands them out to some of the guys. But as I've said like a million times now, the FBI was starting to get on on the case of and close in on certain members. Now, this is like a really big story, and I'm not going to go into detail about all the different people that the FBI was looking at to connect the dots. I'm just kind of going to jump ahead to some of the more let's push us up towards the end a little bit.
All right.
So let's deal with some of the major raids when the heat really started to come on.
Okay.
So a bunch of them had been monitored for a while now from the FBI. Some of them knew it, some of them didn't. They were intensely paranoid. Yarborough in particular was, and Pierce were like, trying to move locations as much as they could. I think Pierce had like 3 families with him too, including his like pregnant wife. Like they were going in like big groups and stuff like that. He had also learned how to fly airplanes, taken that up as a hobby.
Also bad.
Purchased like one of those like super light aircraft and was like practicing flying it around, that stuff, which the FBI also got note of. And, some of the like local townsfolk in some of these places started to be like, who the fuck are these guys? But the heat really comes down. Like they basically concluded the FBI had a good idea of where some of the higher ups were, but weren't quite sure how to get to Matthews, and they wanted to make sure that they could get them all together, basically.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Which makes sense, right? Because with a group like this, like as soon as you like really start to put the heat to them, they'll go deeper underground, and God knows what they'll do.
Man, I'm just not used to seeing the FBI do their job on this podcast. It's like a little disoriented.
Well, I mean, you still $3.6 million.
Yeah. You make a target tasty enough, they have to do it. God damn it, Bobby.
So, they had, I guess, managed also to get a couple, guys to infiltrate the Aryan Academy, not surprisingly, since it's like a public operation. And they were looking into, how some of these funds were being spread around and, following some of the money trails. Oh, I do want to mention one really funny idea that one of them had.
All right.
So one of them got duped into thinking that they could buy lasers from, some scientists in California.
Yes.
And that was, their big plan, that they were going to,
fucking death rays.
But yeah, they wanted to buy, microwave weapons and lasers and, use them against Zog.
Excellent.
But Matthews was kind of smart enough to be like, dog, no, I don't think that's real. I mean,
do you know who are these people who tried to sell them lasers?
Yeah.
In one of the books, it has their names, and I didn't write it down because it turns out that they were phonies, and it was some other guy who said that he was 2 scientists that they were going to put serious money down on this.
Awesome. That's such a good idea.
Throw $100,000 at it or some shit. You know what I mean?
That is such a good idea. Maybe we should set up some company selling shrink rays to fucking siege pilled guys,
Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, the laser idea was definitely totally harebrained, but they did have some other kind of more feasible plans. So in these operational groups, some of them were gonna be focused more on doing some terrorism. They had some plans on bombings and shit like that they wanted to do, and were buying C4 and weapons and stuff.
Okay.
But they were also planning another major heist. So that guy, their guy Ostrout or whatever, who worked for Brinks, went in to help them out on an even bigger operation. So they started actually planning a heist on the Brinks Depot in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And where there was a vault and stuff. And Ostrout had figured out that once monthly or something, a shipment of money comes in from Hawaii. That's usually between $30 and $50 million.
Okay.
And the idea was to hit this depot when this money's there. And I think Ostrad at this point had realized that they were serious. They'd paid him pretty well, for his help. And he had some other guys involved, which again, Scootari was a little bit sketched out about, because they're okay, you're starting to involve more and more people. The FBI's really looking into us hard. But this operation did seem to progress quite a bit. They had gotten the floor plans for the area where the vault was. They had gotten like blueprints of the employee IDs that they need to get into this place. They
Wow.
they had scoped it out extensively, planned out where to put snipers around the building, all this kind of shit. But of course, they didn't really get to do that because the FBI started to come down hard. The guys that were under surveillance were really starting to pick up on it, and especially Yarborough. Now, Yarborough was the first out of the top guys to get raided. The FBI showed up at the place that he had rented, which I think was coincidentally, the FBI knew the layout of the place because it had been a place that they had previously busted like an illegal weed operation. So they were like already been to the house. Like it was like one of these remote like places or whatever. And they had like the floor plans or whatever. But in their attempt to apprehend Yarborough, they got into a shootout, as tends to happen when the FBI goes in on these right-wing guys.
Right.
Yarborough was wounded, but managed to get out. And like get out and escape and go through the woods. He was shot in the leg, but still managed to get out. Now, the FBI, when they finally got into his place, saw kind of what we know and aren't that shocked by, but like the typical person might be shocked by. It's this the standard Nazi apartment and its decor. So they found, obviously, you go into a room, big old picture of Hitler. Next to a big old picture of Jesus,
which is on top of a stash of kiddie porn.
They didn't mention that. But
I mean, this episode, of course, includes David Lane, and we know that he has.
Right. Yes, we knew some things about David.
Yes. Yeah. Now, I wanted to bring us back to something that I told us not to forget, which is the MAC-10 used in Alan Berg's murder.
Hey, I didn't.
You didn't. And I hope the listener didn't either, because now this also becomes the second firearm that links them directly to a major, major crime.
Right.
Now, Yarborough had for some reason kept this gun, even though Matthews had instructed him to destroy the weapon and like dispose of it. He kept it for some fucking reason. He kept it and he had it in his house when the FBI came. So, like, along with, the pictures of Hitler and all that other stuff, they found fucking C4, they found, like, hand grenades, they found a ton of guns, and they found this fucking MAC-10.
Amazing.
And, they weren't stupid. They figured out pretty quickly, they sent the gun back to ballistics and concluded that it was the murder weapon used for Alan Berg. So there you go. They were able to make a definitive connection between this group and this assassination. Why? Because they weren't fucking careful.
Yeah. I mean, they say, like, all the best laid plans, what is it? No plan survives first contact with a Nazi.
Right.
That's it.
And like I said, at this point, like, even though they were doing like clandestine stuff, they were, they still had, and they were operating in cells, they were still, taking orders from Matthews, and Matthews was sending out like printed documents with like a header of like Bruderschweig, whatever.
Of course, he needs the header. I mean, that's the point.
And like with like instructions on it. Now, some of it was in code, some of it wasn't, whatever. But when the FBI went to Yarborough's apartment, they also found a fucking stack of these documents with like a lot of their plans, and they were actually able to see some of the intel that the order guys had on, like, for example, cops and stuff like that.
Good. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's always good to like really completely archive your conspiracies and crimes, especially in one place.
Yes, definitely like have written record of every crime that you do.
You know what? Put the murder weapons on those records just to make sure. Yeah.
Make sure that when you commit like murder, that you keep the murder weapon
and put
in a place
with all of your like documents and
with your documents, with your group
membership list and so on.
It wouldn't hurt to invite people over once in a while too, to show it off.
Did I have a membership list and stuff like that?
No. Well, they didn't find that this time around.
Okay.
But like, they did have, Matthews had that kind of shit. But he wasn't sending it out to everybody. That was one of the few things that was on a need to know basis for these idiots. Now, when word got around that Yarbo had been raided, they started really getting a lot more paranoid. Matthews had come up with different plans on launching finally launching their guerrilla war, and this was time to take out Zog. And he hatched these plans that they were to carry out some of these actions, and once that kickstarts the civil war, they will network with with a bunch of civil administrators, and the civil administrators are, as you'd expect, some of the leaders of the neo-Nazi movement in the U.S. So he had put this, that once the revolution happened, these were the guys that were going to take over civilian infrastructure and become the new government. And not surprisingly, it's, people like Tom Metzger and William Luther Pierce and blah,
I
blah,
imagine
blah, 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 blah.
William Pierce would be very important there for them, no?
Yeah, although interestingly, most of them didn't really know that they were supposed to be the civil administrators. This is a position that was determined for them, because also, they didn't really get time to inform everybody
of their new positions.
Yes. Now the second major, or this isn't the second, maybe the 10th major fuck up here for this. For them was they realized that they had to kickstart the race war now and really start to act and get together and try to coordinate their further actions, right? And this was to be members, sworn members, people that had taken the oath, only them, and they needed to plan this out. Now, for some fucking reason, Matthews thought it would be a good idea to bring Martinez from the East Coast to have a meeting with them on the West Coast. Because, he told him, look, you're going to have to go underground. The feds are on to us, but, we can't talk about this. You have to come out here. We'll pay for your flight. And, we'll talk, and then you'll go back, get your wife and kids, and come with us underground because, Zog is going down and the race war is starting. Now, like I had mentioned, Tom Martinez was already a snitch for the FBI, and the FBI was privy to all of these conversations, and they figured this would be more or less the best time to strike. If they're going to get Matthews, this is the best way to do it, right? Because he doesn't suspect Martinez at all. For some reason, he invites Martinez out there, even though Martinez never took the oath. He was never an official member of the order. I think that maybe, and this is just my speculation, maybe his network on the East Coast was so small that
everybody counted a lot.
Everybody counted. And so and I guess he really liked Tom Martinez, personally.
Yeah, he didn't submit him to the Scientology machine.
Yeah.
Well,
they were definitely submitting everybody to those
emitter?
voice the voice stress test to see if they were lying. That's how they would vet their new recruits.
well, Martinez was a member of the National Alliance, right?
Yeah, but at this point he had already kind of he wasn't so active in the movement anymore. In fact, he had already told guys pretty much hey, I want to kind of lay low, whatever. He wasn't, he hadn't really given any indication that he was ready to pack up and go deep underground.
There probably was a reason why he invited him. And I'm looking at the list of, people affiliated with the order and from what groups they came, and he's the only one from the National Alliance. So maybe maybe he was some kind of a direct contact with William Pierce or something that.
No, that's not quite true. There were a couple other guys that were National Alliance dudes.
Okay.
Yeah. Guys that had moved to the West Coast specifically, who were National Alliance guys before. So yeah, I think that part of why he was so close to Martinez isn't really clear to me, or really clear to anybody for that matter. I think Scootari himself was kind of do you really trust this guy? Whatever. And so they fly him out. The FBI prepares everything. They meet him in Portland, and they were smart enough not to they pick up Martinez at the airport. Bob Matthews himself goes there. Of course, there's feds in the airport. And Martinez had told them what Matthews had told to him, like where they were, which hotel they were going to go to, some like Holiday Inn in that like area. And of course, Matthews was paranoid enough to think that maybe if like the phone was tapped or something, they would be onto that. So when they got in the car, he took them to a different motel. And they were pretty thorough, like in searching the hotel for motel for bugs and stuff like that. But, basically they were like, okay, we'll spend the night here, and tomorrow morning we'll like head out, have this meeting, and then you'll fly back to the East Coast and pack up, and that's that. Martinez, of course, told the FBI. He called them from his motel room,
Right,
and was like, okay, they're here. Like, I don't want any violence. Just like, this is the plan. They're going to get up at 7 a.m. and like we're going to leave, and that's it. And so the next morning is when the FBI decided to hit.
Mm-hmm.
The accounts of this are pretty chaotic because Matthews was already out of the motel room when the FBI started closing in, and he saw what was going on, and like a gun battle ensued. He started, shooting at the feds. The feds shot at him. He got shot in the hand, but ultimately was able to kind of dip out fast enough before the FBI completely overran the motel. So he was wounded, but got out, managed to hitchhike his way out of town with like a trucker. He was like, oh, I hurt my hand, take me to the hospital or something, and had him like drive him out of town. So he was able to escape pretty quickly. Some of the other guys he was with were apprehended immediately, and it became pretty clear who the snitch was, and that the plan that they had wasn't going to go how they wanted it to, right? Like this was, they did not really see this coming at all. Matthews was like really taken by surprise by the whole thing, and was like, personally insulted, obviously.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So Matthews manages to escape. He goes north. In the process, he manages to contact some of the other guys that haven't been arrested yet and lets them know what happened, that like, basically Martinez was probably the guy who snitched on them. The FBI closed in on them. He was almost caught. He was shot, blah, 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 and that he was going to dip out. Now, some of the other higher ups were like, look, we got to leave the Pacific Northwest. Like, we got to go anywhere else basically in the country. Some of them wanted to go to the Southwest. Some wanted to go to Canada. Some wanted to like get the fuck out, but anywhere where they could reconvene. Matthews kind of had his own idea about all this, and he went up to Washington. He went back to Washington State, but he found a place on an island called Whidbey Island, which is one of these islands that's like off the coast in like the Puget Sound, like north of Seattle. He found like a pretty quiet house there and decided that like, okay, now is, since basically there's no turning back from this now, what we need to do is come out of the underground and declare war on the U.S. government. All right.
That should work.
Now, word got out to like the guys that weren't in jail yet, the guys who hadn't been raided, and for some fucking reason, again, he thought it would be a good idea for them to physically come to the location where he was. And, a bunch of them did, and they drafted what would come to be like their declaration of war against the United States government.
Do you think this is because of that? Like, if you're a uniformed combatant and you have a declaration of war, then blah blah blah, you can be treated as a prisoner of war. That bullshit.
No. This was like, okay, like the world is going to know who we are now. Like, if we can't conduct our like clandestine plot to like commit terrorist acts and bring down the Zog, then we're going to have to do it publicly. And they, drafted this statement, which, again, one of these very long Nazi
I call on everyone to stand up like men.
Pretty much. It opens again with kind of parts lifted from their oath.
Okay, sure. The same thing recycled over and over again since like 1981 or whatever. Yeah.
Goes into this tirade about how, America is being overrun like that, by Mexicans and N-word blacks, every, typical racist bullshit. and that, this was, to these kinsmen we say, rise from your graves, white brothers, rise and join us. We go to avenge your deaths. The Aryan yeomanry is awakening. A long forgotten wind is starting to blow. Do you hear the approaching thunder? Is that the awakened Saxon? Wars upon the land, and the tyrant's blood will flow.
Oh my God! So what? There's zombie yeoman.
Yes, and that's, again, I'm just reading parts of it because it's too long. They actually drafted like a few of these texts, like, therefore, for blood, soil, and honor, for the future of our children, and for our King, Jesus Christ, we commit ourselves to battle. Amen.
Ah, I know that bit. Yeah. You know where I know that bit? I know it from David Myatt's Aryan Liberation Army oath.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, that little bit at the end there. I guess that's where he lifted it from. That son of a gun.
Interesting.
That little rascal.
Also, he's Scottish, but he thinks that he's a Saxon, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
I think
German,
his,
Saxon, Gaelic,
I think his mother's side is English.
Okay.
But like, yeah, I guess he felt this real affinity towards the Scots too. Like I said, he learned the bagpipe, and he had written that he imagines that like the Pacific Northwest is what Scotland looks like, which I don't think is fucking true at all. Because I don't think they have like temperate rainforests in fucking Scotland.
All those fucking castles around Portland.
Yeah, old growth forests and shit. It's a very Scottish thing. So yeah, they this is their declaration of war. They start issuing other statements that they record on tape recorders. One where they call out Martinez specifically and say that, like, we know you're the snitch, but they don't actually call him out by name. They say to the guy in room 14. And this is like what they're going to send to the media. And they're like, we will hunt you to the ends of the earth, and like, we will remove your head from your body.
Okay.
So yeah.
He gets it, guys.
So, they prepare a lot of long-winded statements about how they're going to destroy the Zog and how now was the time to rise and blah, 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 blah. But again, what he didn't realize is that there were even more snitches than he imagined. So, like, I think it might still not be clear which one of them really dropped the dime on his particular location on this island. But one of them straight up called the FBI and was like, this is where Robert Matthews is. There's like, they're preparing shit. He's here. Gave like the exact address.
All right.
And so the FBI, who previously didn't know where he was because he did successfully escape, were like led right to his fucking door. So before, like, he had even been able to like make these public statements, the FBI was already starting to make their move on the compound. And now we'll jump to the end of old Bobby Matthews.
He had a good run.
So some of his lieutenants and whatever had left the island and were going to continue to carry out the war against the Zog. But Matthews was still in his place, and the FBI surrounded the place, and there wasn't much he could do about it. So there was a standoff from the very beginning. They were trying to negotiate with him. He, made some insane demands like, yes, I will like call off my war if you ship all the black people back to Africa and shit like that. Dumbass shit. And eventually he stopped talking to the cops and they decided to make their move. Of course, he was heavily armed, and started firing on the approaching officers. He fired at the helicopter they had brought from, didn't shoot it down, but like, was definitely like going all out with like full auto weapons. He's going for it. And he had decided at that point, I think he had penned like a martyrdom, like suicide letter too.
Sure.
Like
Blaze of Glory thing.
Yeah. Like, I'm going out as like a hero of the white race and blah, blah, blah. And this is my sacrifice for, the white children or whatever the fuck. But here's another, like his demise is the typical is the typical lesson on like why waging like war as like a militia movement with small arms will do you very little good because the guys that you're fighting against, so the Zog, the federal government has like a nice little thing that they call aircraft.
Right.
And that helicopter.
Wait, David Lane had a plane,
Yeah, and they had like way better explosives than you probably do.
Oh, yeah.
So at this point, the FBI started firing flares into the house. A helicopter dropped like flares onto the fucking house, which
Chaos.
I guess detonated a box of grenades that he had prepared.
Fair enough. I mean, you got to imagine that was part of the plan. I mean, like, we're not going to have to waste anything on this guy. Like, yeah.
And that's the end of Robert Matthews. He died in a fiery blaze in this house.
As he would have wanted, really.
I guess so.
Yeah.
His, cremated remains were returned to his wife, Debbie, who scattered them on, their farm. His poor mother attended that. The funeral had Scottish bagpipes.
Okay. He had a kilt. He had to, right?
Oh, he definitely had a kilt.
Yeah.
But yeah, his mother moved off the farm, and went off to live with a friend somewhere. Eventually died and was buried alongside Johnny in Marfa, Texas, on the family plot.
All right.
But the end of Matthews also kind of spelled the end for most of the order. So, like I said, they had a lot more snitches in this Silent Brotherhood than they probably would have liked. A ton of them flipped
Oh.
immediately. Really a lot of them. And some of surprising higher ups too, immediately were just okay, we'll testify, whatever.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So yeah, the Silent Brotherhood snitched on
Silent
themselves.
Brotherhood.
Again, with these guys, they don't really have anything that they're fighting for. At a certain point, you just have to weigh your options and be like, damn.
Yeah.
This sucks, I
really
could have
fucked up.
I could have lived a normal life because I'm a white guy in the Pacific Northwest.
Christ, Gene, I mean, I have a degree.
Exactly.
We've got kids, damn it.
So yeah, the House of Cards collapsed totally. And the guys that did kind of go underground and run away, David Lane was apprehended a year later. So they arrested him, I think in 1985, somewhere in the Southeast, I think in North Carolina somewhere or whatever. I have a degree.
Yeah. I mean, Jake's Jewish. He's not so bad.
Well, actually, that the good guy Ken Loff or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was his whole argument when the cops came to him, because he flipped immediately, and he was like, "Yeah, I thought they really kind of took it too far. I'm from Long Island. The Jewish guy was a best man at my wedding and shit."
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, still, fuck him too, because he had he had between when he moved there in 1974 or 5 and 1984 to figure out that maybe hanging out with the fucking Aryan nations isn't a good idea.
He just seems like a guy who just kind of goes with the flow, you want to come to our fucking meeting? I'm all right. Yeah. You want to be the best man at my wedding?
Want to baptize your children in the fucking Church of Jesus Christ Christian Aryan nations?
Yeah,
sure, why not? White power,
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not doing anything,
I don't want to kill nobody or anything, but
yeah. And he made it out to the other end, He just wandered his way through one of the most successful white nationalist terror groups ever, and came out the other end fine.
Yeah, totally. I don't think he actually got convicted of anything, because he didn't actually really in the end do all that much.
He's probably surprised people even ask him about it, He's like, oh yeah, that was weird, huh? Oh.
Isn't life strange sometimes?
The heroes these people have, man. Really, I can't get over it.
Yeah. So that's pretty much the end of the order. But there are a couple things that are really important to mention. And that's despite the fact that like a lot of them flipped and a bunch of them went to jail, like prison for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
A good portion of that money was never accounted for.
Right. Yeah.
And that is like pretty important because we do know that like probably a lot more of it did end up with National Alliance.
Was
like
there
a lot more than
was there an attempt by the state to prove that National Alliance and William Pierce were a part of this whole thing?
Well, do you remember that's when the FBI picked up the investigation again that they had dropped on William Pierce, and they did another one, and it lasted all of like essentially up to the death of Bob Matthews, and they closed it again. Yeah.
So no.
Yeah.
would be the answer.
Yeah. No. The answer is no.
Although, like
No.
William Pierce is pretty like openly proud of this connection. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Matthews
Absolutely.
basically announced this organization on a conference of the National Alliance, and
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Richard Butler and the Aryan Nations too said that they were heroes that would inspire generations. At their conventions after that, they would always sell like, the Bruder Schweig or whatever the fuck gear, like pins and shirts and all that stuff.
I don't think Pierce was like sweating the FBI at all. I mean, like the more I think about it and how easy it was to get information out of that compound, how untouchable Pierce has been. Like, I think he had no reason to be afraid of them.
I mean, like the immediate period afterwards, the FBI did do a lot of raids on some of these kind of bigger white power organizations, but not like, for example, National Alliance. Or
No, they just
Aryan
dug around in the
Nations.
dumpster and shit. Like they usually do.
Yeah.
I mean, the order was like pretty much inspired by the Turner Diaries, named itself
Absolutely.
after the group.
Their whole
described
fucking
there,
program was the Turner
announced
Diaries.
its formation like publicly on a meeting of National Alliance, which is recorded. And
Yes.
and later National Alliance and William Pierce like boasted of this connection and how and got a bunch of money from them, and like, okay,
Yeah. Look, he was never hurting after that. It's not like, I mean, he had resistance records, obviously. I mean, but I don't know. There was also some story. I don't know if this is their story or not, or if this went down at all. But there was some story that Matthews was like Robin Hooding some of the money around to like farmers. But that also kind of sounds like something that he would say. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They were quite generous with their money. Like it also kind of alerted people to what they were doing. Like some of them would, when they were like hiding out in these small towns, would like, buy firewood from some local guy and like pay him a lot of money.
Oh yeah, I heard stuff like that. Yeah.
Like, like tip them heavily. You know what I mean? Like,
oh,
it's $100. Here's $300. You know what I mean?
Man, so they fucking literally paid off the farmers, and even that wasn't enough to get their support.
Yeah, no, they never had like a mass base of support.
Yeah.
I mean, like, like I said, the FBI did start to crack down on some of these other guys. There was like an attempt to restart it. I mean, at least there was a group in the later 80s that called itself like Bruder Schweigen Strike Force or something. They committed some. They committed some bombings.
Sorry, just Bruder Schweigen Strike Force.
Yeah, right.
Oh, it's such a wow.
This is 80s like action movie.
It's such an 80s name. Yes.
Yeah. But they also, I guess, reportedly planned, like, we're doing like counterfeiting and, wanted to do some bank robberies too. That didn't last because, they did bombings and
right. Yeah.
They were tied to the Aryan Nations. Kind of the most important legacy, I think, maybe ideologically for them, though, was David Lane. Because David Lane, we know David Lane today, not just because of the order, obviously. We know him mostly for coining the 14 words, right? 1488, that's his thing. And this all happened like after he was in prison. You know what I mean? So like he got sentenced to life for his involvement in the, murder of Alan Berg and, for all the other bullshit that the fucking order did that he was a part of. But like, he spent a good period of his prison career writing and like getting his word out from there. So, like that whole like 14 words thing was shit that he like, wrote in prison. Do I need to explain 14 words?
Something white children, something.
I like.
We're so sick of it. We're just so sick of their fucking bullshit. Just repeating.
I like
their
Ray's
fucking
version
bullshit
more.
all the time. Yes, something white children, something.
We must secure an existence of our people and a future for white children.
Yeah, that's the
That's
guy
14.
that was perving on the little girls from Prussian Blue.
Yeah. Famously, also from prison, was like beating off to like children.
Yep.
Well, he said that he likes children. I mean,
Yes. He formed a neo-Nazi religion while he was in prison too. But the main thing, like, 1488 is his legacy, right? That's the Nazi shit you find everywhere.
Yeah.
World over. If you see 1488,
Yeah.
you can thank old David Lane.
And some kind of early white genocide writings too, I guess, is in there. I think Pierce took some of that.
Yeah. No, I mean, he did his part because he was around for a while. I mean, he only died, I think, in 2006 or 7 or something like that.
We need like one of those, this many days without an accident signs, but this many days without pedophiles, and I just pictured myself flipping it back to 0 after we got to like 4,
after we got to like the end here with David Lane.
Yes. God damn it. All right.
Zilla did end up having his Matthew's child. They had a daughter who was born, I think, like the day that like Yarborough got raided, and he had to like fucking dip out like immediately, like the day she was born. So I don't think he ever really got to see her after that. Which, fuck him, who cares?
Well, yes. I mean, it is a very cinematic tale in the end. I can see why there's some movies, Makes sense.
I mean, absolutely.
Definitely has that.
I mean, they pulled off like major heists. They, they had all the cool gear and gadgets. Like, I didn't go so much into it, but they did spend like a lot of money, like buying like really high end weapons. They bought like fucking, there's typical like American like gun nut dorks that like to be super kitted out. So they got like night vision stuff. They always had like silencers and like, all the coolest gear and all that kind of shit. In their survivalist nature, they would always have like, go packs in their trucks with like, fishing lines and shit like that. If they needed to like flee to the woods, that they could be able to survive and shit like that. Yeah, I kind of question how much like any of that would really work for them, given that we've pretty much established that a lot of them are like urban middle class people who are kind of LARPing it, and like never really were like, they're not like those like Siberian forest fighters that like get like dropped by a helicopter in the middle of Siberia and then have like a fucking like 2 months where they're just like living off the land, putting out fires and shit. Like they're not like that hardcore. They're like dudes that like,
they like camping.
They like camping.
That's different.
And, like even after their first, like, even after that, like major heist where they camped out for a few days, and that was probably like the longest any of them had camped out.
Yeah.
Like whatever. Like, when they were on the lam, like most of the time they were like renting houses, or trailers or whatever, they had like a roof over their heads. They weren't like, really like, they weren't fucking Teddy King it, like fucking living in a cabin with no like electricity or water or whatever. They always had phone lines and shit.
It was, look, the guy got to live out his favorite book, who can say that? Like if I got to live out like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I'd do it. I'd kill both of you in a heartbeat. Ray, Lord of the Rings, am I right? We'd be gone, no? Come on.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Boris and his book on kamikazes in history.
You really like that book, don't you?
Oh, man. All right. Well, let's leave him, huh?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd like to live out some of my like favorite dystopian like sci-fi books. No. Like,
no.
I mean, orcs are scary.
Yes. Yeah. Would you be an orc? Is that how you see yourself?
No. This is why I'm saying they're scary. Like I don't know.
What would you be? Which race would you be?
I don't know. I actually never thought of that, I have to say.
All right. Well, stay tuned, listeners.
This is us like, decompressing.
Yeah, I want to talk about books we like for once. Yeah. All right.
I've kind of had enough of these assholes. Like,
yeah. Like,
we always say that.
Right now. from this.
But it's always true.
Yeah. Let's do something easy next episode. All right, guys, let's get out of here. Let's skedaddle.
All right, guys. Cheers.
Later.
Bye.
Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.